Hi everyone, it's Rachael here and welcome to episode number 29 of the Walk the Talk podcast. So in today's episode, I am talking to the lovely David Wolfe, who is a registered dietitian and food addiction counsellor at Trigger Free Nutrition, and we are covering the subject of food addiction and sugar addiction. How do you know if you're addicted to food? How do you know if you're addicted to sugar? What are the signs and symptoms to look out for? And David also gives us some tips for what you can do and recommendations for where you can go for help if you feel like you need that. So enjoy the interview, and if you have any questions after you've listened, please contact either myself or David. We'll leave our contact details at the end of this episode. So hi David, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the podcast. How are you this morning?
Fantastic, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Just before we get started, I thought it would be a good idea to just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a registered dietitian. I specialize in working with people with compulsive eating behaviors, especially sugar addiction and food addiction. I feel that people often want to kind of understand what that means. The best way to describe it is through the parable of alcoholism. I think that alcoholics can't drink no matter what, and people that are addicted to certain foods can't eat them no matter what. And so I help them achieve abstinence from these foods through a variety of different ways, and then to support them through that and through their recovery. Could be the rest of their life. It could be short-term maintenance, meaning that they need me for a little while and then they're okay. And that's sort of what I do on a daily basis. I also help people with other things like managing their diet, managing and reversing their diabetes, and I also have clients that have had bariatric surgery and it failed, and then so we're kind of trying to reverse the regain. But for the most part, my love is the food addiction work. Okay, and why did you become a dietitian? How did you get interested in the food addiction side of things? How did it all start? Yeah, so it's easier to start with the second question. So I became interested in food addiction because my mom's a self-proclaimed food addict, and my sister is also. So just kind of growing up around that. And that being said, I always had this drive to like cook and eat and feed people, and so I ended up starting out my career in culinary arts, and then I morphed that over into nutrition. And like in my family, I'm from Eastern Europe, and so like my great grandmother was like a village cook, like she cooked for an entire community. So there's definitely a lot of food stuff in my blood. There's definitely a lot of excessive eating too. Like my whole extended family has some elements of compulsive eating. So that was like the food addiction part. Now the nutrition and becoming a dietitian was just like I always wanted to help people and I always wanted to cook. And so it seemed like the best of both worlds. And so I kind of morphed them together, and then I ultimately ended up becoming a dietitian about 6 years ago, and that's kind of where this started. Okay, that's really interesting. So I get a lot of questions and a lot of emails and messages from people saying that their biggest problem is that they can't seem to stop eating and that they think they might be addicted to food. So what would if you had to sort of give a definition, I suppose, to food addiction or sugar addiction or both, is there a way that you could say this is the definition, these are the signs and symptoms to look out for, and this is sort of if someone is wondering if maybe they have an addiction to food or sugar, how would they recognise that? Yeah, so I I created this triangle. I call it the trigger food triangle. So it has 3 points, like most triangles, and so the 3 points are guilt, debate, and romance. So if you feel guilty about eating, or even some people even feel guilty before they eat, but then definitely after, if you debate about a food, whether you should or shouldn't eat it prior to eating it, and then throughout the process of eating it. So like, let's say you're eating a food that you're triggered by, and you get halfway through the pack, you're like, oh, I should stop. Oh, I'll have one more. Oh, this kind of like continual debate. And then this romance aspect is like, kind of like eating in secret, almost like you're having an affair with food, like a rendezvous. So, I think it's a lot easier for people to resonate with the guilt and the debate. A lot of people either deny the concept of romance or don't notice it. But those 3 things I think are really helpful. The other thing is, I think, is just, if you have cravings for food that like control your life, whether you avoid certain social functions because they don't allow you to eat the way you want to, or want to, or need to, or
sorry, that's my doorbell ringing.
No, that's okay. Or I just lost my thought. You're uncomfortable in certain situations. Like, let's say you have to go to your friend's house for dinner, but they're not going to serve where you usually eat, and then you kind of have to adjust your life, or you end up lying to cover up the fact that you don't want to go because you're not going to get what you need in order to feel better. Kind of this like manipulative, isolating kind of paradigm.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that, and I certainly can. Like, I would say I can relate to all of that in like my previous life, as I suppose I kind of like would say. But lots of people said to me, this was quite a while ago, when I was struggling with, I suppose, with addiction to sugar. Now that you speak about it like that, lots of people used to say to me, there's no such thing as being addicted to food, there's no such thing as being addicted to sugar. What would you say to someone that's, that says that? Because there's been a few people said that to me, there's no such thing as food addiction, you just don't have control, or you just need to like put a bit more effort in. Like, do you know what I mean? What would you say to people?
Yeah, so we have this willpower debate, right?
Yeah.
If willpower worked, like in general, there'd be no crime. There'd be no infidelity. There'd be nothing. We'd all be great, and society would be wonderful. But largely, it doesn't work. So, for some reason, the biochemical forces are much more powerful than our sheer will. Like, so it's like the chemicals versus our thinking. Generally speaking, the chemicals win. I love to tell you a story, because I think it kind of plays into this question, and then I'll answer the question more directly. But so I was on an airplane with my wife, and every time I talk about food addiction, I tell this story. And there was this little girl. We were coming back from a convention in Florida, actually, for the Food Addiction Institute, and there's a little girl. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. She's screaming and crying, and she passed around between like her 3 relatives. They were all trying to soothe her and calm her down, and nothing would work. And the flight attendant asked if she could help, so she brought over a blanket, and she brought over a pillow. The girl's still crying. She left, and then another flight attendant came over and asked the girl if she wanted a cookie. She immediately stopped crying, because the sugar actually removes pain. It acts almost as if it was an opiate. So, and the girl knows that she connects the cookie with feeling better.
Yeah.
So it's not that she ate the cookie and she stopped crying. She realized she was going to get a cookie, and she stopped crying. So that's kind of why willpower doesn't work, because we know that works. Like, the substance works, but eventually it gets to the point of compulsion where it's almost impossible for it to work because we need so much. And it's almost like we're just eating to remove the physical suffering of the withdrawal, which is kind of the same story with the alcoholic or the drug addict. It's just they're basically using or drinking to so they're not actually in physical pain and they're not like sick. So it can get and does get to that point. Now, repeat the direct question.
So the question was, what would you say to people that think there is no such thing as food addiction or sugar addiction?
2/3 of America is overweight and obese. The processed food industry is massively overpowering. They use what's called neuromarketing, which is like they're marketing at your brain. I mean, I think it's pretty much everywhere. I think that the problem is that I don't think that necessarily everyone is addicted to sugar, but I think for everyone, sugar is addicting. So the cravings and the compulsion. And I think that the reason why people are in denial is because there's no like legal issue. There's no like driving under the influence, and people aren't stealing stereos and TVs in order to buy sugar because it's cheap. You could get your fix, I don't know, probably for like in your part of the world, a couple pounds, and here, $3 or $4. So it's just really, unfortunately, it's reasonably priced because it's all made from industrial crap that is easy to make. But I say for anyone who's in denial and you want to not be in denial, tell me and I'll connect you with people that'll change your mind. Because I know people that have lost everything because of food. I mean, houses, I mean, relationships, families, everything. Just like all drugs.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. With food addiction, sugar addiction, there's no. I suppose with alcohol addiction, there's, that's it's a real recognised addiction, and there are, you sort of. You can be diagnosed with that and there is help out there and it's recognised, but whereas with sugar and food addiction there's still quite a lot of stigma attached with that, and it's like a lot of the time people might think, just stop eating it. It's just stop eating as much. Like, it's really got to be that simple. Like, it's not like alcohol in that it's addicting, but it is.
It is, yeah, that's the thing, and it's insidious. Well, even drinking and drug addiction is insidious. Like, it gradually gets worse over time. But I think as people become alcoholics, they're semi-aware of what's going on. Maybe not even, but with food, I think it's food. It's like
we need it to survive.
Right? Yeah. True. You need certain foods to survive. Yeah. You certainly can survive without sugar, but that's very true. Now, that's a very common argument in terms of denial. It's like, well, you need food to live, and I wish I was an alcoholic and not a food addict, because then I would because I need food to live, and it would be less difficult. And the truth is that most food addicts aren't addicted to all foods. They're addicted to certain foods. So I think that kind of puts that to rest too. And
do you think that what do you think leads to a food addiction? Is it nurture? Is it nature? Is it the world? Is it the environment that we're in, or is it a combination of both? Why are some people addicted to food and some people are not?
Yeah, so there's definitely like a correlation with trauma, but I want to say that trauma doesn't cause addiction. So there's definitely some relationship correlation, but it's not a precursor. It's not like, well, I'm food addicted because I had trauma. That's not, we can't say that. But there is definitely some sort of correlation with trauma and physical and sexual and emotional and verbal abuse. But I think it's a biochemical response. So I think that we have my mentor, who's Bitten Johnson from Sweden, and she has this thing called the chicken and the egg. Mm-hmm. And so is it did the chicken come first or the egg come first? And for us, that means, did the emotions come first or did the sugar come first? It's always the sugar. You always have the substance before the disturbance. And so people who are trying to solve the problem through emotional work, mm-hmm. if the substance remains present, they get very little they make very little progress. Mm-hmm. Because the problem isn't the emotions. The problem is the emotions which are caused by the substance, mm-hmm. the shifts in the neurochemistry and all that. But it's hard to say what causes it. I think largely there's some aspect of it is genetics. And I hate to tell people that because then they feel like, they're screwed because they can't do anything. Mm-hmm. And, partly that's partly true, but, you definitely can't pick your parents. So,
no,
but there's definitely a genetic component and there's definitely a social component. I think that there are people that like to eat and then gradually they become food addicted. And there are people that are food addicted from the second they eat sugar. Mm-hmm. We hear that. And they tell the story as if they were chasing that first feeling they got, that first euphoric feeling. And they've been chasing that all this time and they can never re-achieve it because it's not possible. Mm-hmm. And that's what addiction is. It's that we keep on we try to better living through better chemistry, and we never get to better living. Mm-hmm. Okay. Better chemistry, but
yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it definitely does. It definitely does. For people that are listening that are sitting, maybe nodding their head, thinking that sounds like me, that sounds like me, that sounds like me. Do you have any advice for people that are willing to put the work in that is required to address this? Are there ways to combat binge cycles? That sort of binge guilt deprivation cycle. Is there something that you could say that stops that cycle? That is a simple things that people could do that could possibly help?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is relatability. Mm-hmm. and fellowship. So you need to find people that are like you, mm-hmm. and who have gone through this and are in some stage in the recovery process. So, because there's something about being in a group, mm-hmm. and finally having people that understand you, mm-hmm. On the gut level. I think that I used to eat like that. That relatability, that's so important.
Yeah.
And it actually, that connects back with this feeling of safety that's actually when the mother is nursing, she produces a chemical called oxytocin. Mm-hmm. So a lot of food addicts don't have that enough supply. So they have to go through different processes. One of those is groups, fellowship. The other is eating a certain way, taking care of themselves. There are all sorts of different ways, but that relates back to that feeling of safety, mm-hmm. when you're young and when you're being supported by your mother or your father, or that kind of feeling. But so that I think is missing. So the fellowship is key. I don't know anyone really that's been able to do this alone. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a single case.
No.
So that's so important. The other thing that can be really helpful is, you can connect through literature, I think, too, not to the same degree, but reading stories of people who have found recovery. There are some online, and there are some noteworthy books worth reading. One of the best ones, I think, is called Food Junkies. It's by Vera Tarman.
Okay.
She's an MD out of Toronto. She runs a drug rehab, alcohol rehab, and food addiction rehab center for women in Ontario. Okay. But it's easy to read. Mm-hmm. There is mention of some foods in there, so mm-hmm. Just reader beware. But mm-hmm. That's definitely really good. There's also we have a Facebook group called Sugar Bomb in Your Brain. Mm-hmm. Sugar Bomb is one word. And so that's a group of people who all identify as being sugar addicted and who are working, just like using it as a form of connecting with others and getting support. And I manage that with my mentor and 2 other women from Europe who are in long-term recovery. So that's a really valuable resource, I think, because sometimes it's hard to go to in-person meetings until you have the courage, but sometimes it's really easy to join a Facebook group.
Yeah,
so
completely agree.
So it's not the same. Like, it's not going to have the same level of support. It's not like one-on-one live, but it's pretty helpful.
Yeah. And would you say that when you're addicted to certain foods, would you say that starting to recognise which foods are triggering you is important? Is that, part of recovery?
Yeah, but I also think largely, so what happens is people will it's what we call changing seats in the Titanic, which means, we know we're going down, but we're just going to change seats because we'll be super right. So that's what kind of happens when you start to give up one food, but your body will all of a sudden, if you're a sugar junkie and you're a candy junkie, all of a sudden you'll give up candy, and then all of a sudden you can't stop eating bread. And you're just switching substance. So I think it's really, I think it can be clear, especially as you're detoxing, what it is, because you'll have cravings for it. So if you're having mental obsessions and physical cravings for a specific thing, then I think it becomes more clear. But also, the disease in and of itself is a manipulative beast. So it will, it's okay, it's only bread, or it's whole wheat bread, or it tells us these things in our head, or it's really just our subconscious fighting to get the relief that we think we get from the food abuse, but we really don't. But our brain can't tell that really. It's like it'll work this time. So I think that's really helpful. But I think that generally speaking, we're talking about sugar for the most part and carbs. So it's just a matter of how progressed you are, because some people can't eat sugar in any form. Right? Sugar, maple syrup, honey, agave, corn syrup, fructose, even sweeteners, all the fake substitutes. And then there are some people that can't eat grains. And there are some people that can't eat flour, but will eat whole grains. And then there are some people that can't eat wheat. And so, if you're having a hard time figuring out what it is, I would seek professional help. Yeah. And the other good resource is something that's called the Food Addiction Institute. And we have a really good website, and it's actually a brand new website. And its content is going up really quickly, but we're making a lot of resource guides to help you get started. And the other thing to do is see if you can go 24 hours without eating sugar. Just 24 hours, or just 12 hours, and see, how do you feel? What's the response? Is it uncomfortable? If it's uncomfortable, it's probably working. So I think, unfortunately, that's kind of how it is. And the other thing is, you don't want to detox without support, because, and when I use the word detox, I mean the physical, biochemical detox, not you do this for a week and then you can go back to eating everything you ate before. Physical withdrawal and emotional and mental withdrawal, because the substance is leaving your body. It's temporary as long as you don't reintroduce the substance. If you reintroduce the substance, you will be in chronic detox, and you'll constantly be reintroducing it and trying to get off it, and you'll just really feel like crap all the time. But once you're off it completely, all the symptoms go away. But I think that having someone who's been through that process is really helpful. So when I work with clients, I have a few volunteers. Now, I know a lot about the process, and I've been through sugar detox before, but also I know people that have very severe food addiction, who have been through the detox process many times. And and who have sort of, out of the goodness of their heart, volunteered themselves to help people who are like trying to go through it for the first time. And so they'll just give you things that are helpful to know, like, oh, day 5 and 7 are really bad. Make sure you have good support systems, or stay connected with people, or they'll just give you suggestions that can be really helpful that I can usually give, but not always, because I haven't been through the process nearly as many times.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it sounds like there is hope for people that are struggling with this. Absolutely.
I mean, recovery is possible for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to one thing, and that's willingness. What are you willing to do? Are you willing to eat no sugar one day at a time for the rest of your life? Or maybe using a smaller increment of time is easier to swallow.
Yeah.
But are you able to get to your next structured meal without consuming an addictive food?
When you say, like, abstaining from sugar, so say someone is addicted to a certain type of food or a certain food, in order for there to be a recovery from that, would you say, do you mean that they must abstain from eating that food for the rest of their lives, or is there any chance in the future that they may be able to eat that food in moderation again?
They would never be able to, if they're truly addicted to the substance. The pathway is like locked. So like as soon as the substance is reintroduced, the addiction will reengage.
Right. Okay.
That's why we say that like alcoholism and drug addiction and food addiction don't go away. They can go into a remission. But they can't come away. As soon as the substance is reintroduced, the insanity comes back. I mean, anywhere from within 5 minutes to 2 or 3 days of trying to moderate. Because we see it all the time when people try to, especially with, we see it with food too, with people who have 10 or 15 years of food sobriety, and then they go out and then they can't get back. Or it takes them 1 or 2 years to get back. But I don't like to look at it through the frame of work of a whole life, because I think that that's exhausting. So if you look at it through the frame of, today I choose not to eat sugar. Right? And then you have a 24-hour period where you have choices to make throughout your day, and you can make the choices according to where your willingness is really. And but the people that are really tired and broken, I think it's a lot easier for them because the pain, I mean, they say that pain is the touchstone of progress. So, I mean, and for the addicted brain, we need a lot of pain in order to change. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. So for the listeners, if they would like to find out more about what you do, where's the best place to go to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. My website is called triggerfreenutrition.com. And that you'll see what my packages are and what we do and what I do. And my email is also david@triggerfreenutrition.com, but you can reach me through there's like a contact form on the website. That's a really good place. And just for general resources, I'll again encourage people to go to the Food Addiction Institute, which has a lot of information and just helpful resources and professionals that are maybe available in your area. Actually, we do not have there's not a single food addiction professional in England.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which we're trying to fix, but it's sad. It's a big country. Yeah, we do. I think we could benefit from that, so hopefully in the future. Yeah, I'm sure it will happen. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much for your time today. Oh, yeah, absolutely. A big thank you to David for taking the time out of his day to speak to us today on the Walk the Talk podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you would like to get in touch with myself, my email is Rachael@walkthetalklife.com, and you can also contact David
via his website. That's at triggerfreenutrition.com, and all of the links that we've spoken about in this episode of the podcast are in the show notes. If you're on iTunes, you can just scroll down right now and have a look at the notes, and there are lots of clickable links there for you to find out more. I'll see you on next week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, please leave a review. It means a lot to me. I know I say it every single week, but I would really appreciate if you could just take 20 seconds out of your day to leave me a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. It really does make a difference. I'll see you in next week's episode. Take care, and I will see you later.